Welcome to Wilder Wolves Hall of Fame Mode Fandom. My name is Wilder Adams, and today is a live episode of Wilder Wolves podcast. A little over 31 hours and change until the 2026 NBA draft. And this week's will be really fun, guys. It's obviously the draft, speculation, rumors, they're flying all over the place, left and right. So there's a lot going on, and the Minnesota Timberwolves are at the front of it with a lot of rumors going into the very near future, whether they're connected with Giannis, Derrick White, John Morant. There are so many names that Minnesota is currently connected to. And today we are going to just address the biggest Minnesota Timberwolves rumors as we are just the day before the 2026 NBA draft. So much can happen. And the plan with over the next couple days is this episode is going to be addressing the rumors. And then if a trade happens between now and the 2026 NBA draft, I'll immediately go live. So whenever Minnesota does something, assuming they do something, make sure to hop on Wilder Wolves podcast right away, because our goal is to be one of, if not the first platform to go out and react to whatever happens. And then tomorrow night, we are going to react to whatever draft pick Minnesota makes, whether it's at pick 28 or if Minnesota goes up. And also a part of my processing for why I decided to go live this morning, the day before the draft. You never know when a trade's going to happen. So I had an episode when Minnesota traded Mike Conley last year. I was in the middle of a pre-recorded episode, and that was a lesson. Like, if something could happen, just assume go live, and then we'll see what happens. So you know what? Just in case something goes down in the near future, or during this episode, we are going to go live and we are going to react immediately. So we're going to have minimum 2 episodes, maybe 3, if not more, in the next 36 hours or so. So guys, it is going to be an absolute blast. Make sure to subscribe to Wilder Wolves podcast as we really get into the thick of the 2026 NBA draft, 2026 NBA free agency. It's going to be an absolute blast. And yeah, like I said, so today we are going to just talk about some notable rumors and also some reports relating to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Some things to keep in mind as we walk into the 2026 NBA draft. And if something happens in the middle of this episode, guys, make sure to comment, let me know, and we can react right away. And as we get throughout each player, I'll interact with comments, talking about each player, each subject. So make sure to stay tuned for this entire episode. So yeah, guys, thank you all so much. I am so incredibly excited to get started. So now we have a list of players that I'm going to talk about, and I've put together a list of notable reports that have stood out to me the last couple days from a handful of reporters, including Shams, John K., Ramona Shelbourne, and more and more and more. And what we do here is it's always a mystery what is actually going on, right? A lot of media reports are a negotiation game between front offices. So we're just going to connect the dots and also speculate, infer on how to take these reports. So we're going to start right away with something that is actually tangible, something that happened. So on Friday night, my antennas were on because LeBaron Philon, potential lottery pick in the 2026 NBA draft, certainly a top 20 guy in this draft class, a loaded guard draft. He posted a story in downtown Minneapolis on his Instagram, and he kept it up for about 2 hours and then deleted it. And I saw it on Twitter at first that he was in downtown Minneapolis. And obviously when that happens 3 days before the draft, paying attention, like, you know, keeping aware, like there might be something going on there. And then John K. the following day confirmed that LeBaron Philon worked out in Minneapolis on Saturday and also reportedly had a very good workout for Minnesota. And I think the obvious question right here is, why would LeBaron Philon work out in Minneapolis if there is no chance, essentially, that he ends up in Minnesota at pick 28, especially 3 days before the draft? Because if he just met with Minnesota at the combine and just talked with the team, then it wouldn't be as big of a deal because players are accessible at combines. Notably, it's a football comparison, but in football, the Minnesota Vikings interviewed Caleb Williams, who was a projected number 1 pick, went number 1. Minnesota had no chance in hell to get Caleb Williams because it was also an in-division team, but they still met with him because players are accessible at the combine. So when a player meets 3 days before an NBA draft, that has significance. Whether that means there is a very good chance Minnesota ends up picking him or not, it means that his agency, more importantly, thinks Minnesota has a good enough chance to draft LeBaron Philon for it to be worth working out with the team. And LeBaron Philon is the only name that we know of who is high level, notable, that worked out with the Minnesota Timberwolves, because last year there was that secret workout with Johan Beringer, and there was some talk that Beringer was going to go in the lottery, and he fell to pick 17, and Minnesota got him, and they were able to get a meeting with him in Chicago, not in Minneapolis, in Chicago, to watch him work out, and that was never reported. So if that's true, what else is true? Minnesota maybe has interviewed other really good prospects over the weekend. So I think that, one second, guys, I just had, my apologies. I think my lava mic just fell over. So I'm going to get that fixed in a moment. But yeah, my point is with Minnesota, if it doesn't mean for sure 100% that LeBaron Philon is the only guy working out with Minnesota. It could have been a lot of other guys. Nobody really knows. So that is just something to, stay in tune with. And I think it's really significant, guys. I think it's really significant that Minnesota was able to land prospects of that caliber days before, especially if you're an agency. You're not going to work out with a team that has no chance of drafting you, or at minimum, you want to create the illusion they have no chance of drafting you, right? Maybe LeBaron Philon falls in draft night. Nobody knows. But even if he does, why would he work out at pick 28? I would be shocked if his situation is that desperate at this point. So Minnesota working out with them, to me, is a sign Minnesota is very much in the mix to trade up in this draft class, because he's not going to be there at 28. And then, so if that's true, what else is true? How would Minnesota trade up? With Minnesota's draft pick flexibility pretty minimal, I don't see a world where Minnesota trades up using draft picks in the future. They've already done that with Rob Dillingham. It didn't work. Minnesota, Tim Connolly's been fixated in landing a star next to Anthony Edwards over the years. So why would he trade the rest of his draft pick flexibility for a mid-first round pick and draft a mid-first round pick point guard? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So my thought when I hear that is there something that is very much off the ground in a 3-team type trade? Or not a 3-team type trade, but in a trade in which Minnesota is trading up involving Julius Randle or Rudy Gobert? That is my question now. Does Minnesota have something enough off the ground in a trade negotiation to justify an agent saying, you know what, we will work out in Minneapolis 3 days before the draft? The timing here is what's absolutely critical. The fact that a high-level prospect was willing to work out not months before, but days before the 2026 NBA draft, that is where things get very fascinating. And I'm not entirely sure what the answer is on this, but I do think that this is definitely worth watching. And, some trade ideas I have, like, is Julius Randle getting, let's just say in this draft, the Grizzlies draft Darren Peterson, okay? So AJ Dubnsa goes 1, Cam Boozer goes 2, Darren Peterson falls at 3. He becomes a franchise guard. They trade John Morant. They might trade John Morant regardless. But maybe Minnesota has a trade in place. I don't know. I'm just speculating. This is not reporting. Minnesota trades Randle in 28, maybe stuff. I'm not sure. For John Morant and pick 16. Maybe it's part of a trade up in that way. Maybe this is more bold. Maybe it's a trade involving Rudy Gobert and you're trading up to, I don't know, a late lottery pick and then stuff. Maybe a team like Charlotte that has multiple first round picks in the middle of the lottery or middle of the draft. That's another idea I have. I just don't see Minnesota being in the draft capital game and trading up, because basically all their picks are like frozen until 2033, and they have a pick swap in 2028. So I don't really understand why anybody would work out with Minnesota if there isn't a trade that isn't involving a big player in Minnesota to get up into the draft. And by the way, pick 13 for Rudy Gobert is not a good trade. So I'm not even saying that pick 13 or LeBaron Philon would be the main source in a trade like that for Rudy Gobert. Maybe it's just a small part of the trade, but you're capturing the last second workouts to really gather information before you may or may not make a decision to trade up. I don't think it's that big. I think it's a big deal. Minnesota is working out LeBaron Philon and has interest in working out products or prospects in that tier. But I'm more interested in the fact that LeBaron Philon's agency was more interested in working out in Minnesota, going in person to Minneapolis. I think that's where this is especially interesting to me. So I'm not really sure what's going to go on. We'll see in 30 hours, and a trade could happen literally any given second if you really think about it. So there's a lot of possibilities here, but I do think that this is something so worth monitoring right now. And I don't know what's going to go on, guys. I don't know what's going to go on. So that is the first rumor. And by the way, LeBaron Philon, if you guys haven't watched him, he is a very high level talent. He's a 6'3" guard without shoes, 6'2.5", I think. 6'6.5" wingspan. He's a little under 180 pounds. His weight has been a big conversation with the draft lately. So LeBaron Philon definitely isn't a perfect prospect. And frankly, he has similar questions to Rob Dillingham in terms of just weight. And I know for Minnesota fans, trading up for a small guard like that and having weight concerns once again, that's PTSD times 4. I totally get that. And I relate to that as well. But I think until we know what draft pick it is, I would just view this as Minnesota is working out higher level prospects in interest of trading up. How do they trade up? And that's where I'm looking at, is there a big trade on the table, and a mid first round pick, if not higher, is in the books. And I'm also wondering where or what other prospects is Minnesota working out. So this is a really fascinating story. Not sure what's going to happen with that, but I think we definitely, as we await the Giannis Antetokounmpo trade, guys, that is something definitely to monitor. As because after the Giannis trade, I believe that the league is waiting on the Giannis trade, and then there's going to be more trades trickling down in the future. So stay tuned for that, because things are about to get fascinating quick. And let's transition now to Giannis Antetokounmpo, because Giannis, guys, there's a lot of reports coming with him. All right, I'm just going to list the reports on these notable names that I'm mentioning in this episode. Giannis Antetokounmpo, Timberwolves are one of the 3 teams in the mix. This was reported by Ramona Shelburne yesterday on ESPN. She said the 3 teams she hears the most are the Boston Celtics, Miami Heat, obvious, and she mentioned the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now we're going to bring that more to today, okay? Shams said that the Heat and Bucks, or the Heat and Celtics, are viewed as the favorites for Giannis. They're not only viewed as the favorites, but they're viewed as the finalists. So perhaps Minnesota is out of the race there. But then Shams follows up. Shams follows up and says there's a mystery team that the Bucks are comfortable taking an offer from. So you have those 3 reports, and then we're going to have a few more reports until we connect all the dots here. The Bucks, reported by our own John K. Bucks are underwhelmed by packages from the Celtics and Heat. That's been reported by John Krasinski this morning of The Athletic. Timberwolves are trying like hell to hold on to Jaden McDaniels. That's my own wording. But essentially, the Wolves haven't been fully willing to deal a Jaden McDaniels in a trade, even as significant for Giannis. That was reported by John K. And then Mike Scotto, who's a really cool guy, by the way, he reported a slightly contradictory report before this report by John K. The Wolves would only trade Jaden McDaniels for Nikola Jokic and Giannis, the 2 top players in the world. And finally, to wrap a bow on all the Giannis Antetokounmpo rumors, Kyle Kuzma tweeted on Twitter a lot of bombs, insinuating Woj bomb. We miss Woj here, but Kyle Kuzma also tweeted that. So there's a lot going on here, guys. There's a lot going on. And what I think is really important when hearing about trade negotiations is that media also plays in this. People tell somebody one thing to gain leverage, and then somebody tells the other thing to maintain or retract the leverage. That is very common in the trade world. So that's why you might hear a contradictory report like Jaden McDaniels is not on the table, and then the Timberwolves would only trade Jaden McDaniels for these guys, and it's Jokic and Giannis. And that's usually what happens. And what I genuinely do believe is I think the Minnesota Timberwolves aren't in the top 2 of the Giannis sweepstakes, but it does feel like when I hear this, all these reports wrapped into one, I think the Timberwolves are still competitive in the Giannis trade discussions. I don't think it's a coincidence that Ramona Shelburne, at this point in time, just before the draft, months after Minnesota was the favorite to land Giannis and it didn't work out, she mentioned the Timberwolves for a reason. And I believe that is because the Minnesota Timberwolves are still somewhere in the mix. Not saying that they are the favorites for Giannis. I'm not even saying it's likely, but it does feel like to me the fact that they remain in the conversations. And John K. can agree that Minnesota is still aggressive in pairing Anthony Edwards with Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Tim Connolly is also fixated with pairing a star next to Anthony Edwards. It's been Kevin Durant, now Giannis. This has been a theme with Tim Connolly. So I hear all of this, and I think Minnesota's still in the conversation. Maybe they're in the bubble. Maybe they're on the brink of not, but I still think that they're in the conversation. And now to the Jaden McDaniels point. Just, I'm going to be Captain Obvious. Minnesota's not getting Giannis Antetokounmpo if Jaden McDaniels is not in the deal. That's just Captain Obvious. So why is it that Minnesota is not willing to trade Jaden McDaniels for Giannis, and they realistically want to get him? And then why is Minnesota also only trading Jaden McDaniels for Nikola Jokic and Giannis Antetokounmpo? These are contradictory reports because somebody is getting one information from one source and somebody else from the other, because it's a leverage game, in my opinion. I think Jaden McDaniels is in the conversations for Giannis Antetokounmpo. I speculate that Jaden McDaniels is very much in the conversation to trade for Giannis. Doesn't mean Minnesota's going to do it. Doesn't mean Minnesota is the favorite to do it. And no, I'm not reporting this. But connecting the dots here, I think Minnesota is trying really hard to maintain a strong relationship with Jaden McDaniels, because I think everybody knows it's unlikely that Minnesota is going to get Giannis. So if you're going to spend all of your time dangling a name out, especially Jaden McDaniels, who's the second most valuable asset in the franchise, you're doing that because you want to protect the relationship while still put him in the mix. Minnesota knows they can't get Giannis without trading Jaden McDaniels. It's just common sense. So they're going to protect Jaden McDaniels in the 90% likelihood they can't get this trade done by saying, oh, we would trade Jaden, but only for the top two players in the world. And then it escalates into, oh, we would have traded Jaden McDaniels at all for Giannis. That's relationship management. You don't want Jaden McDaniels to come in the next season uneasy or frustrated or feel unwanted. We saw what happened with Julius Randle this year, who seemingly was very frustrated by being in the mix. And just observing, it looked like Julius Randle checked out in February. You don't want that to happen to your second most valuable asset in the franchise, somebody who is very likely going to be asked to be a top 3 option on a high-level playoff team next year. You don't want to do that. So as you pursue a superstar like Giannis, make sure to not mess up your relationship with Jaden by telling him how important he is. We wouldn't trade you for Giannis. We wouldn't trade you for Jokic. Yeah, you would. I'm sure there's 10 players in the league Minnesota would trade Jaden McDaniels for. Doesn't mean he's not valuable. If there's only 10 or so players in the NBA that you would trade Jaden McDaniels for, you're saying he's damn near untouchable. So by putting these out here, you could still value Jaden McDaniels a lot, but also reiterate that you are highly valuing Jaden McDaniels by telling people, no, we wouldn't trade Jaden McDaniels. We would not do that. No chance at all. Not even for Giannis, or only for Jokic or Giannis. They're trying to protect Jaden McDaniels' relationship with the team as they actively try to get Giannis. I don't think Minnesota is going to be the team that gets Giannis, but I think they're trying like hell to do it. I really do. And I've had conversations in previous episodes that I am more skeptical on the Giannis thing, not because he isn't a great player. I think if you trade for Giannis and you make the next right couple moves, you could form a contender over the next 2 to 3 years. My stance has always been, if you trade for Giannis, you're still kind of saying goodbye to Anthony Edwards potentially in 5 years, because with all the moves Minnesota has made over the last couple years, this would be your last big move in the Anthony Edwards era for the next handful of years. And if the goal is to continue winning with Anthony Edwards his whole career in Minnesota, then why would you make a trade that helps him immediately, but really puts him in a tough position when he gets into his true prime years, ages 29, 30, 31? I still want to protect Anthony Edwards' later prime, which is why I would look at other options outside of Giannis, but I wouldn't deny Giannis, to me, still the second best player in the world. Giannis Antetokounmpo gives you a chance to contend as soon as next year. Giannis Antetokounmpo and Anthony Edwards would be the best duo in the NBA the moment they step on the basketball court. So I'm pro Giannis as a player. I'm just not pro the timeline, because Minnesota has already put all their chips into Rudy Gobert and Julius Randle and, even Jaden and Nas to an extent. I don't think you should make your last big move in the Anthony Edwards era when he's not even 25 years old yet. It's a timing thing for me. I know Tim Connolly wants to win a championship, and I've heard Jonathan Givony joke around that, in 8 years, Tim Connolly will want to be in Italy, probably not working in the NBA. So maybe Tim Connolly is just trying to get his championship in the next handful of years. I don't know. But I think from a Timberwolves organizational standpoint, you want to maintain Anthony Edwards' chances to contend over the next handful of years, which is why I think there's a lot of validity to the idea. Make a move that adds ball handlers around Anthony Edwards next year, while also maintaining the leverage for your next big move to happen in a couple years, and then seeing what you have with Jaden McDaniels and Nas Reed, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I would do. But if Minnesota wants a superstar, Tim Connolly is going to try like hell to get a superstar. So I do think the Giannis Antetokounmpo thing has a validity still. I'm sure Minnesota is very comfortably the third team in this deal. I think the Bucks, I think just by connecting the dots on these reports, I think the Celtics and Heat have a way better chance of landing Giannis. But I do think never say never. And I think the fact that they're trying so hard to protect Jaden McDaniels' relationship with these contradictory reports to an extent, I think this is in the makings of trying to get Giannis. So that's kind of my 2 cents on the Giannis Antetokounmpo thing. I think Minnesota is trying to get him. I think Minnesota is realistic. I think they know they have to give up a Jaden McDaniels plus a lot more. But I also am guessing they know there's not a great chance. So don't mess up your relationship with Jaden McDaniels while you pursue a outlier opportunity, a low chance opportunity. So that's what I think is going on. And we've seen with like Jaylen Brown in the past, right, with the Boston Celtics, if you are constantly in trade rumors as a second star, you can become growingly frustrated. It feels like this is the end of Jaylen Brown in Boston regardless, in my opinion. Brian Windhorst talked about Jaylen Brown being somebody who might just get traded regardless, whether it's Giannis or not, which, by the way, is why we made a mock trade with Jaylen Brown going to Minnesota the other day. Make sure to check out that episode with Joel Moran. He was great on that episode. But what the Celtics did is, Brown was very consistently in trade talks over the years, right? A handful of years ago, Jaylen Brown was in conversations for Anthony Davis. And then now it's become Giannis Antetokounmpo. And I'm not sure. I don't know Jaylen Brown, but I would speculate that Jaylen Brown is probably, he probably feels that a little bit, which is why he feels incentivized to go to a different team, becoming more accepted of going to a different team like Brian Windhorst talked about. So I think that's what you don't want to do with Jaden McDaniels. You want to make sure he stays valued in the organization. Julius Randle checked out in February because he was in trade talks, which I think is a Julius Randle problem, but it happened. And I don't think you want a Julius Randle situation with Jaden McDaniels. And now let's react to some comments, guys. Appreciate you guys for being here on 11 a.m. on a Monday. I'm going to go live whenever Minnesota makes a huge move in the next couple days, if they do. And I'll also go live for sure, 100%, after Minnesota does a draft decision tomorrow night. So make sure to stay tuned for that. Why not trade for Michael Porter Jr.? Hey, man, Michael Porter Jr., I think if you have a shot maker like that to that level, I think he makes a ton of sense. I do. And a spot-up shooter, someone who could space the floor for Ant, we've seen last year how important that is. I haven't heard anything. I haven't seen anything about MPJ to Minnesota, and he certainly doesn't help the ball handling questions that remain with the Minnesota Timberwolves. But, I never say never, man. I know with Tim Connolly, you don't hear about things until they happen. And yeah, appreciate Peter as well for commenting the 100, talking about the Jaden McDaniels relationship management, which is what I think is happening right now. I am fully with that. And then swing for Michael Porter Jr. and Derrick White. Yeah, we're going to talk about Derrick White for sure. And there's a handful of other names. I think Michael Porter Jr. is an interesting name that I haven't thought about. So shout out to you for coming up with that name. I like I said, Tim Connolly could do anything, legit. I never foresaw him doing the Rudy Gobert trade. Didn't foresee him trading for Julius Randle. You just never know with the guy. And that's what makes him kind of a fun GM to have on your team, because you're always on your heels on what your roster is going to look like tomorrow. So, shout out to Tim Connolly for that. And Trey Murphy, thank you for mentioning that. I was going to mention that late in the show. Trey Murphy is the name that John K mentioned that the Timberwolves have inquired about. And it feels like for the Pelicans, this would be a really good time to trade Trey Murphy because his value sounds ridiculous. Like when I see mock trades relating to Trey Murphy, it sounds like the Mikal Bridges packages a couple years ago. He's a huge player. He's got a little more on-ball skills than you would think, and he's a special shot maker. He can really shoot. He has range, and he's super athletic. He's built for the playoffs. So I see why people talk about Trey Murphy, and I don't know what's going to happen with him. I'm assuming if I was the Pelicans GM, I would sell high on him because I don't think he's a top 2 option on a legit playoff team, but he could be a good 3 or 4. So I think selling high if you're the Pelicans when you're so far away makes a lot of sense. And Minnesota, talking about him, it's another point. It sounds like a guy like Trey Murphy, as we talked about, similar to MPJ, somebody who's pretty money off the catch, somebody who provides consistent spacing and also can attack a broken defense. I think Minnesota needs more guys who can do that. And I think, I always say this, I think the Minnesota Timberwolves front court last year kind of ruined all the flow for Minnesota's offense. I really do. I think the lack of pace and spacing and consistent playmaking, even from Julius Randle, I think that made life harder for Ant, Jaden, Nas, and other guys like that. So, if you replace a Randle and or a Gobert and you get guys who can shoot, I think the offense looks way different. So, yeah, that's something to think about. And now to the next player I'm going to talk about is Derrick White, who's been consistently all over Twitter. John K talked about Derrick White, the Timberwolves being especially aggressive in adding another ball handler next to Anthony Edwards, somebody with the pedigree of Derrick White. Minnesota's especially aggressive after Derrick White. So I think this is really interesting. I think Minnesota seems serious about adding another ball handler next to Anthony Edwards. And I think that was the single biggest issue. I truly believe Minnesota getting a floor spacer like a Nas Reed at the 4 to replace Randle and then adding a ball handler can completely change the spacing of Minnesota's offense. And I think that could be exponentially easier for Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels to create in space. There just wasn't a lot of space last year. Anthony Edwards was running for his life, it felt like a lot of the time. I mean, the degree of difficulty Anthony Edwards had last year to create his shots and still getting 28, 29 a game on, what was it? It was like 62 true shooting. I don't think we talk about how ridiculous that is. And I truly believe if you get Anthony Edwards, another ball handler, and more spacing at the 4, we're talking about a dude who can average like 32 a game on 64 true shooting. I truly believe Ant's a more talented scorer than Shea is. Just has way more moves and is a more dynamic 3-level scorer. And I think Minnesota needs to put Ant in a position to showcase that talent to life. And they haven't done that well enough, which is why starting Nas is interesting and starting Derrick White is interesting. I believe Minnesota would love Derrick White. Not only is Derrick White another ball handler, he's also another elite defender who allows Jaden McDaniels to roam defensively, which puts less weight on him offensively. And also, you're untapping what makes Jaden McDaniels a truly special defender. He is so freaking versatile. And Minnesota, over the years, has used Jaden McDaniels as a floor spacer and has used Jaden McDaniels as a point of attack defender, using Jaden McDaniels to fill the holes that this team has, rather than putting players around Jaden McDaniels that fully maximize what he can do. That's been the Jaden McDaniels story in Minnesota. Jaden's continuously gotten better, and he's still every single year not put in a position to be maximized. He's been used as a role player to maximize the best players, whether it's Ant, Cat, Rudy, Ant, Cat, Randall, and D'Lo. So, Jaden McDaniels, I would love for Minnesota to do everything they can to maximize Jaden McDaniels. And you could do that by adding another floor spacer, another ball handler, another elite defender. And Derrick White is all of those things. So it makes total sense that Minnesota wants Derrick White. And Derrick White is also one of the most mature leaders in the league. And adding that to this locker room, in which Nas Reed said it, not me. Nas Reed said at the end of the year, there is immaturity. Moodiness was the quote. The Timberwolves have moodiness. That's what the Minnesota Timberwolves have been for a long time. So Nas Reed, he had a point with that. And Derrick White would be a big addition. And I'm not sure how Minnesota gets Derrick White. I'm not sure if I don't think it's a direct trade with Boston. Maybe it's Gobert for Derrick White, and then you try to accommodate the front court with the Randall trade. I'm not sure, but maybe it's also part of the huge Giannis trade. I don't know. But Derrick White is a very big time option in terms of fit. And as this comment says, which I really like, just asking about his age and future being a starting caliber player. That's the question. I mean, Derrick White is in his 30s right now. I'm not exactly sure how old Derrick White is right now. Let me check his age in this moment. So Derrick White is 31 years old. So he's a little younger than Gobert, similar age to Randall. So he's in that timeline. I think we saw last year with Derrick White that when you ask him to be a second option, he's just not. He shot below 40 from the field and below 35 from three. And I think that is attributed to that he was the second option on that team. He was asked to be the second guy next to Jaylen Brown when Jason Tatum was gone. That's not who he is. He's a third or fourth option at best. He's a great connector, one of the great connectors in the league. He's like the guard Draymond, right? So I think Minnesota, you trade for Derrick White and you're asking him to be your fourth option behind Ant, Jaden, Nas, and maybe your fifth option behind Io. I think that's what they would do in this type of workings, right? There were some talks that maybe the Celtics would want Naz Reid straight up for Derrick White. I wouldn't do that. I think Naz Reid, especially in the Wemby era, is actually really critical. I think Naz Reid starting at the 4 is going to make a big difference in terms of offensive spacing. I think Naz Reid has earned that right in year 8 to get a real shot as a starter. They traded Karl Anthony Towns so they can extend guys like Naz Reid. So let's see what Naz Reid has. I want to see them start Naz Reid. I don't know if Minnesota would trade Naz for Derrick White. It's been widely reported that it's Ant, Jaden, Naz, and Beringer as the core. But I also just, if I'm Minnesota, I wouldn't trade Naz for Derrick White. And if they do, I'm not sure how I would feel. I think I would probably think it through. I think there's a lot of reasons to say it's a good idea, bad idea. But Derrick White's a great fit. He's a great fit. And I think if you scale him down, he could be a good player for another 3 years because his IQ is also what keeps him really good on top of his athleticism. So to answer the question, I think he has a few years of good basketball in him. And when you look at the Derrick White contract, let's take a look at the Derrick White contract while we're at it. Give me 1 second. Bear with me. I'm searching Google on the fly right now. 4 years, $125 million through 28 to 29. So next year, he has a $28 million base salary, $30.4 million cap hit. So he's making a lot of money. He's making a little less than Randall. So it's not a bad contract, I think, for what he gives you. So I see why the Celtics would want Naz Reid, especially if they get Giannis. Naz Reid next to Giannis makes all sorts of sense. But if I'm Minnesota, I would be really hesitant on trading Naz. I think if you trade Naz in the future, I think he's probably going to have a better year in the future than what he had this year. So you wouldn't be necessarily selling high on Naz Reid. And I think he can make a big difference for the offensive spacing. And I think Naz Reid's also one of the least scared guys in the NBA of Victor Wembanyama. Ever since Wemby's rookie year, Naz Reid has attacked Wemby. And Naz Reid had a really good second round. His shot was back. He was aggressive. And he's also physical, willing to be physical with Victor Wembanyama. I think Naz Reid is a part of the Victor Wembanyama solution. So I would be hesitant on trading Victor Wembanyama. Or for Naz Reid. I'll trade Naz Reid for Victor Wembanyama. Don't get me wrong. I would do that. But yeah, Derrick White, I think if it's for Gobert, that would be interesting. I would have to see what other moves they make because I think it isn't talked about how important it is Rudy Gobert is to the front court. So if you trade Rudy Gobert, you need to have some pretty confident resolutions if you're going to maintain the top team in the NBA. So there's a lot here. And I think we'll see. And let me look at some more comments. Hawks want Rudy. No, they have the 8th pick in the draft. Why would we be working on file on? Maybe a Kongu out of it. Yeah, I mean, I've actually talked about Rudy Gobert for a Kongu and 8 before. I've talked about that. I've even made 3-team trades where we get Kyrie, and that's kind of the package. And the Minnesota also got like Gafford back. I've made mock trades like that before. It makes all sorts of sense. Part of me wonders if the Hawks are going to get Jaylen Brown tomorrow. If Jaylen Brown's going to be in Atlanta in reality, and that 8th overall pick actually is going to go to Milwaukee, and then the Celtics get Giannis. And then obviously the Hawks will get like Kuminga, Risa Shea, and more. I wonder if that's what's possibly in the works. It feels like with the Jaylen Brown stuff, it looks like with how much he's in the rumors, he could be traded soon regardless. So I'm wondering if that's what's going to happen, because also the Hawks need a number 1 scoring option. So yeah, that's going to be interesting. I think if they have the 8th pick, I think Ade Mara would be very much in the mix. It's a deep guard draft. They have picked 23. I could see them taking the 7'3" guy who's got a lot of skill, a lot of passing, and a great rim protector, and then getting somebody at 23. And if they need a rim protector so bad, Rudy Gobert is the epitome of that, right? So I would say never. I mean, maybe that's what the Hawks would do. I think if Minnesota got Ayton and Kongu, that'd be a really good trade. Whether they draft a Phylon or maybe they draft maybe it's a Keaton Wagler at 8 overall, who would be an excellent fit next to Anthony Edwards, like a absolutely phenomenal fit in Minnesota. That would be a fun idea. I really like that mock trade idea that you made. So I would say, guys, with Tim Connolly, I genuinely believe this. Unless you're saying trade Anthony Edwards for Jared Culver, any mock trade with Tim Connolly, you can't rule out. You can't rule out within reason. So I'm definitely in the camp of being creative with these trade ideas, because I think anything could happen. I genuinely believe that. I don't see how the Derrick White trade would happen without giving up Naz Reid through the Rudy and Julius don't fit with Giannis, and there's no way Julius is on this roster next year. Yeah, I think if Minnesota got Derrick White, man, and they didn't trade Naz, I think they would have to get ultra creative. Maybe it's a 3-team trade. I still don't buy that the league doesn't value Julius Randle. I mean, Julius Randle isn't the only guy who had a bad series against Victor Wembanyama. So did Chet Holmgren. And to add to that, with the new lottery rules, it is so much more valuable to be a medium bad team than it is to be an absolute butt cheeks team. It just is. So for that reason, I could see teams like the Nets having interest in Julius Randle. I could see a team like maybe Chicago having interest in Julius Randle. You can even see a team like New Orleans if they trade Zion, or Charlotte, who needs another half-court creator. I think there's going to be suitors for Julius Randle. Maybe he's a neutral asset. Maybe he's a slightly positive asset. But I'm not a full believer in the idea that Julius Randle is untradeable like a lot of people think, which is why I'm confident, like you're saying, Julius Randle's gone. So I think it's a wait and see. I think if Minnesota got Derrick White, maybe it's possible they could do a 3-team trade involving Rudy Gobert, Julius Randle. And if it isn't a 3-team trade, maybe it's Rudy Gobert for Derrick White straight up. I think that's how they would get Derrick White. And if I'm Minnesota, like I said, Naz Reid makes a ton of sense for Boston. I'd be hesitant on trading Naz Reid at this point, because I think he has another gear in him that we haven't seen yet, because he hasn't had the opportunity to start. And more importantly, I think he has a skill set that can get more out of Anthony Edwards than Julius Randle has been able to. So I would be hesitant on trading Naz Reid, personally. That's just me. But I do think it's worth talking about, because I don't think Naz Reid is 100% touchable. Not to the same level of Jaden McDaniels. There's a reason why Minnesota is reporting we're not willing to trade Jaden McDaniels, and we'd only trade him for Jokic or Giannis. They are massaging that relationship because they know it's very unlikely they're going to get Giannis. Even though they might be willing to trade for Giannis, they're still going to try to massage that relationship so you don't Julius Randle, Jaden McDaniels, and make him think that the organization has given up on you, so he goes into next year half checked out. Because Julius Randle in the final half of this year was half checked out. That's just what it was. It's documented at this point. So you don't want that to happen with Jaden. And I haven't heard the same thing with Naz Reid necessarily, even though it does sound like Minnesota does view him as a valuable core asset. So would we be looking to acquire Derrick White to be an active starter, or more of an on-bench solidifier team leader? That's a good question, man. I think if you're Minnesota and you don't get a star guard, I think getting multiple really good guards who have some portability and you have some lineup flexibility, I think that's important in the modern NBA. So maybe you bring in Derrick White and Io, and you start Io and you bench Derrick White, or you go a small ball lineup, or maybe Io stays on the bench. I think there's a lot of options. If you trade for Derrick White. So I don't know the answer to that, frankly. I would guess you'd start. I would think he's the favorite to start if he ends up in Minnesota, simply off of his pedigree. But I think Minnesota, if they traded for a non-superstar guard, it makes a lot of sense to get multiple guys who can shoot and play off the ball and play physical defense. That's why I like Derrick White a lot. It's why Jalen Suggs makes some sense to me. It's why Emmanuel Quickley makes some sense to me, right? So I think those are the type of players Minnesota should and probably will go after if they can't get a big star trade done, which I think is Tim Connolly's top priority, connecting the dots on these reports. So I'm not sure, man. I'm not sure if he would start. I think he would, but I think Minnesota, if they don't get a star guard, makes all sorts of sense to get multiple versatile physical guards around Anthony Edwards, which I would assume is and which Derrick White is. What's your prediction on the trade they're going to make? I have no idea. I can see a John Morant trade happening. I can see Derrick White. I think Emmanuel Quickley is a sleeper. I think those are the three type of players I can see Minnesota trading up for. I don't think they're going to get a superstar. I don't think they're going to get Kyrie. I don't think they're going to get Giannis. I think they could buy low on a star like John Morant, or they could get a great complementary guard like Derrick White, Jalen Suggs, Emmanuel Quickley. So I think that's the path Minnesota's going to take. Personally hate the idea of Phylon in a trade up. Point guards and centers develop slower than wings. If you trade up, give me Yaxel, basically 5 years of upgraded Tari Eason on a rookie contract. It's not a bad philosophy, man. I think a dude as thin as a Phylon would need time in the NBA, and I think he deserves more patience than Minnesota didn't seem to have to the same extent for Rob Dillingham. So I think that's very fair. We'll see what happens, man. We'll see what happens. I have no clue what's going to happen. I think trading up for a wing like that makes a lot of sense. They do need more ball handlers, though. And if Minnesota is going to operate on financial margins and they need more guard play, I think the logic of Rob Dillingham, as much as getting a young prospect, was getting a talented dude on a rookie contract. And I think that's the logic in the second apron league in trading up for a guy like Phylon. And a lot of people say that Phylon is an incredibly gifted offensive player in terms of IQ, in terms of feel, which we saw in the NBA. Rob Dillingham wasn't immediately. Dillingham was really talented, but he was a very rushed decision maker. So I think Phylon, you would hope, who spent 2 years in college, who was probably the second best guard in the country, frankly. I mean, he was ridiculous his freshman or sophomore year. Somebody like that would come into the NBA a more ready product off the bench than Rob Dillingham was. If Derrick White trade happens and Julius Randle gets traded, does Jaden become the second option? I mean, if they get a Ja Morant or somebody, probably not. But I think a lot of this summer is about elevating Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid, in which we haven't seen before. I truly believe that. I think that Minnesota knows they traded extra first-round picks to keep Jaden McDaniels in the Rudy Gobert trade. They traded Karl Anthony Towns so they can have the money to extend guys like Naz Reid. I think Minnesota is going to give those guys a shot. And Jaden McDaniels, I think, is going to be higher prioritized. Whether they label that as a second or third option, I have no idea. But I think Minnesota, if they don't get a star, I think seeing what Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid have makes a lot of sense. And as we're talking, I am actively managing Twitter to see if Shams ever reports anything. I think we saw the Dallas Mavericks. They signed Dusty May, who's the Michigan head coach. Speaking of Yaxel Lendenborg, that's interesting. Dallas, I think, is going to go Michigan players in the first round. I really do. I'm high on Ja for that passing ability. If we keep Rudy, that could help our offensive floor, and there aren't any passers available at the elite level for this cheap. Yeah, I think that's a lot of validity, and I think people have questioned, does Ja Morant and Rudy Gobert work? And my rebuttal would be, Ja Morant has worked with Steven Adams. The Grizzlies were a top 2 seed in the West with Steven Adams as the starting center. And the backup big was Brandon Clark. He hasn't played with a lot of floor spacers in his career. Santi Aldama is a floor spacer, but he's not, Naz Reid. He's not a Miles Turner. So I think my bigger question, if you trade for Ja, is can you have Ja and Rudy Gobert coexist while simultaneously managing Jaden McDaniels? Because I think with those two, you're asking Jaden McDaniels to more space the floor for those guys than elevate as a high-level creator, in my opinion. So I think the biggest question with Ja Morant is less about if he can work with Rudy Gobert, and it's more about can he work with Jaden McDaniels and elevate him while Rudy Gobert is on the team. If they change the, formula of their starting center and it's more of a better floor spacer or somebody with more ball skills, I would have less of that question. But more of my question is, how do you get more out of Jaden McDaniels with Ja Morant and Rudy Gobert coexisting? Because that's not a very spacious front court, or spacious combo, even if you're starting Naz Reid. So that's my question in relation to trading for Ja Morant. And now we've gone through all those comments. I'm going to go through a couple more names that Minnesota's been involved with. We've talked about LeBaron Philon, Giannis Antetokounmpo. We've talked about Derrick White. Another name we've talked about is Josh Giddey, or haven't talked about. John K talked about the Wolves looking into him, but the Bulls don't seem eager to move him. And there was another report on Twitter, I don't remember who reported it, that Minnesota has inquired and has interest in Josh Giddey. And Josh Giddey is interesting, guys. I personally don't think the Bulls are very likely to trade him. They're taking a patient approach with their new front office, their young core, and they're about to draft Caleb Wilson number 4 overall, I think. And I think Josh Giddey is a great combo for Caleb Wilson, because Caleb Wilson, day one in the NBA, is going to be a very good play finisher. So put a great playmaker next to Josh. But Josh Giddey, he's grown as a shooter. He is a good guard with size, and he can pass. I think he took a big leap in Chicago. I think there are some things about the Shea and Josh Giddey fit in OKC that I think are fair questioning if you're Minnesota. I also think you should also question, is that more Josh Giddey not working with a primary ball handler, or Josh Giddey just being a young kid in the playoffs? I don't know the answer to that, but Josh Giddey's talented. He's on a very similar contract to Naz Reid. He can shoot. He's got great size, great playmaking. Theoretically, a guy like that fits well with Anthony Edwards. The question is, does Josh Giddey, is he somebody who can still be effective while scaling down? I think that's the biggest question with Josh Giddey, but I don't think that's a very likely scenario if I had to guess, because I don't see why Chicago would trade him right now. I just don't. And why would Chicago trade him for a Julius Randle? And if you're Minnesota, why would you trade Naz Reid for Josh Giddey? And same for Chicago. Why would you trade Josh Giddey for Naz Reid when the front court is already starting to become your strength with Caleb Wilson and Matas Buzelis? I just don't see the path on getting a Josh Giddey type. But I think it's worth mentioning that Minnesota, among many other players, according to John Kay, has inquired about Josh Giddey. So I think that's something to think about. And this next comment, Kalkbrenner, Yaxel, 14, Sturts, 18 via Rudy to trade. Randall and 28 for Ja would be my top realistic scenario. Yeah, I think those trades are, realistic hypotheticals. I don't see how Minnesota be the team that drafts 2 first-round picks this year. It just doesn't seem consistent with Chris Finch teams. But I never say never. Maybe I think if Minnesota traded for 2 first-round picks for Rudy Gobert, I think that is to build up on a bigger trade. Maybe it's for a Giannis. I think that's what would be the reasoning behind that type of trade. And honestly, the more I think about the LeBaron Philon workout, I still wonder, is that a sign that Minnesota is like going to either trade Gobert for one of those Charlotte first-round picks and then some for flexibility, and they take another rookie contract player? Or is this a part of trading up from 28 to 16 and a Randall for Ja swap? I think those 2 scenarios make a lot of sense. The Hornets and the Memphis Grizzlies being trade partners in a scenario to get into a position to draft somebody in the draft range of a LeBaron Philon. I still think it's really significant that Minnesota worked out LeBaron Philon, because I don't think his agent will work out with Minnesota. In Minneapolis, highlight, in Minneapolis, I don't think Yuan Bernier even worked out in Minneapolis. LeBaron Philon worked out in Minneapolis, which I think could be a sign that Minnesota has something that is off of phase 1 in a trade negotiation, in a deal that can get them up to 16, up to 14, or even higher. Somebody mentioned up to 8 in the group chat. Appreciate you guys for commenting. I don't know, but it feels like something, right? So it's be really interesting, guys. It'll be so interesting. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think I've anticipated a draft like this for trades since 2023. I was convinced that Minnesota might trade Cap for Scoot for a bit, and that would have been a bad trade. But I was like watching that draft, wondering when the report is that Karl Anthony Towns got traded to the Blazers for pick 3 to, keep Damian Lillard in Portland. That was the last time I anticipated a draft to this magnitude. And Minnesota didn't have a first-round pick that year. That was the year they drafted Leonard Miller, pick 33, in which they traded up from the second round to get. And I thought Leonard Miller was a steal. I really did. And maybe in hindsight, that turns out to be true. But it wasn't in Minnesota, unfortunately. Thinking of nothing off the court, what are the pros and cons of getting Ja? A lot of I hear about his personality and locker room clash. Not a lot on-court impact. I appreciate this question, man. And we know this. Tim Connolly, Chris Finch, I think those guys are culture guys. So I think if they trade for a Ja Morant, they are comfortable enough with the risk of the off-court stuff to justify it. So let's talk about the on-court stuff. So Ja Morant is a gifted passer. Incredibly gifted passer. One of the best passers in the league. Average over 10 assists a game in college. His assist percentages, he's had over a 40 assist percentage number in his career 3 times, which is a ridiculous number. He has been a heliocentric playmaker in Memphis and has been mostly successful at it. He's a gifted passer. He's also, when he's at his best, a gifted driver who provides, I think, rim pressure next to Anthony Edwards Minnesota has never had. I think those are true. And I think he is really good at pushing pace. And I think he would get a lot out of Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid, and Ayo Dosunmu, just getting them out in the open court with them expecting getting the ball. I think those are big advantages for Kyrie Irving or for Ja Morant. I think the downside with Ja, of course, is the on-court stuff, but also how does he age? How does Ja Morant age? Have we already seen the athletic peak of Ja Morant? And Ja Morant, without being an explosive driver, is that a good player? If Ja Morant never figures out a jump shot and he's undersized and he's a bad defender and he can't get to the rim the same way, that is not a good NBA player. So the risk is you trade for a max contract player in a second apron era and he can't play. That's the downside. The downside is Ja Morant peaked at 23, which is not uncommon with athletic, explosive guards. John Wall, I believe John Wall's last All-Star game was at age 27 or 28. Derrick Rose was somebody who was not the same after age 23. Ja Morant is 26 years old right now. So the question is, does Ja Morant even have a longer timeline than a Giannis Antetokounmpo based on the history of small athletic guards? It's a big question. If Ja Morant doesn't learn how to shoot, my answer is no. He doesn't have a long-term future as a star guard in the NBA. So the long-term trajectory is a big question for Ja Morant. And another question, as I mentioned in the show earlier, can Ja Morant and Rudy Gobert coexist while still emphasizing the development of Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid? The story of Jaden and Naz is those guys have been great connective role players to get the best out of Minnesota's best players while still being viewed as core young players. There's a certain point in time you have to see what Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid have. And is Ja Morant the answer on that if you have Rudy Gobert on the court? If Minnesota made a change at the starting position offensively at the center position, I would have more confidence in that question. But I have a lot of skepticism that there's enough floor spacing to get the most out of Jaden McDaniels with Ja Morant and Rudy Gobert. So I think those are my pros and cons with Ja Morant. Like I said, gifted passer, amazing offensive talent, but I think there's a lot of questions about his trajectory, his floor spacing, and also he's going to be a target on defense, guys. He's a bad defender, has always been. So he's going to be a target regardless. So, yeah, man, I appreciate the question. I wonder if there is a situation to trade Randall for Ja and bring in a floor spacing center to bring off the bench like a Landale or Brook Lopez and let Johan Beringer play some backup power forward next to them. Interesting. That's an interesting thought. I think my question, I'll twist it a little bit. I feel like, could you trade for like a bigger backup 4? Could a Landale play the 4 and you have Beringer still play the 5? And you still have Beringer used as the roamer, obviously. It's labeling positions. It's not that big of a deal. But, yeah, I mean, front court depth is something Minnesota could add this summer. I mean, I am really excited about Beringer. If I had to guess today, I think Beringer is going to play 15, 20 minutes next year. But you do want some security at backup big. And I think that's going to be something to monitor. Can they get somebody who's a backup and can space the floor? Maybe. I think that's a thought. I think it's a good thought. Now that I'm thinking out loud, I think it's a good thought. I don't know if it's like you get Santi Aldama in the deal, then you like include other stuff. I don't know. But yeah, I think that's definitely not a question to rule out. And I'm going to transition to another player that Minnesota has been in the mix. We talked a lot about Ja Morant, so I don't think we have to talk about the Ja Morant thing much more, but we can go up. A couple notes of the Ja Morant thing, by the way. So currently, this was reported by Sam Amick. Teams with interest, Pelicans, Timberwolves, Kings. He claims that the Pelicans are the favorites to get Ja Morant, which is interesting to me because they drafted Jeremiah Fears, who is a similar archetype to a Ja Morant, and he went 7th overall last year. So that does make a lot of sense to me. And then Fletcher Mackel, I think his name is. He is a sports director of NBC New Orleans. He made an episode this morning, and he said the Pelicans are not in the job business. So who in the world knows where Ja Morant's going? Minnesota does feel like a reasonable suitor for Ja Morant. So I actually think Ja Morant is a real possibility for Minnesota as a low-cost, high-upside player. I think with Minnesota being low on draft capital, getting somebody like that makes a lot of sense. Somebody who does present the upside of a Kyrie Irving while also not costing probably a lot. Like I mentioned, Minnesota, Julius Randle might be a better trade asset than Ja Morant, guys. He's on a better contract. He's more physical. And I think he's a little more, even though it hasn't been that way in Minnesota, I think he's a little more portable than Ja Morant is. So Julius Randle might be enough of an asset over Ja Morant where you can trade up 12 spots if you swap first round picks. I mean, I think Ja Morant could be a thing. We'll see, though. Gafford would be a good grab for backup with PJ maybe. For Julius, I've seen that roam around. Yeah, it's so funny. I feel like Daniel Gafford is like the default big that people talk about if they want a decent borderline starter or high motor backup big. He's like the default good center. But I agree. I've talked about Daniel Gafford, and one of my friends pointed that out to me. Like, he's kind of the default center in the NBA, and I think that's totally right. But yeah, man, I think that's another good point. I think that's a good point. And I think Julius Randle, there's a couple formulas you can do with Julius Randle, right? Maybe you trade him for a star like Kyrie and you add stuff to Julius Randle. Or you make a swap in a similar caliber star like a Ja Morant. Or you break Julius Randle up like D'Angelo Russell into 2 contracts, right? D'Angelo Russell got traded for Mike Conley and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Maybe you could do the same thing with Julius Randle, and maybe it's PJ and Gafford. I know that Masai Ujiri likes those big, versatile wings, and Julius Randle is that. So maybe, and Julius Randle's from Dallas. So that's my glass half full in the Julius Randle to Dallas pitch. And PJ Washington is a playoff player. Daniel Gafford is a playoff player. Those are guys that you could start, have come off the bench. They provide portability, optionality in your rotation. They're great players to have. I'm not sure if Dallas would do that because you do, with Cooper Flag being only 20 years old, 19 years old right now, actually. That's crazy. 20 years old in December this year. I don't know if they want to trade players with that type of depth, but I think if you're Minnesota, you're definitely calling about that. And maybe Dallas does that. I thought Dallas might trade Kyrie this summer, and hey, they still might. But reports come out that they're valuing Kyrie to play next to Cooper Flag, which, by the way, is totally fair. So we'll see there. We'll see there. It's a good thought, though. This comment feels like the biggest offseason of my lifetime. This summer will dictate the future of Ant in Minnesota and our ability to compete. If we fall on our face this summer, I feel like the door is closed. I feel similar urgency, man. I feel similar urgency. I think whatever Minnesota does this summer, you need to assure Anthony Edwards is comfortable. I do. I'm not saying make desperate moves to make Anthony Edwards think he's happy in the short term. What I'm saying is if Minnesota decides to take a reset phase this summer, make sure Anthony Edwards is buying into a transitional phase in which Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid are elevated and you get more guard play for Anthony Edwards. Or you trade for a star that Anthony Edwards loves. What you don't want to do is have Anthony Edwards get the thought Minnesota isn't doing anything. Minnesota isn't doing enough to build around me. That's the thought you don't want Anthony Edwards to have. And I think if you make a move this summer that either makes the team significantly better and or maintains flexibility to elevate Jaden and Nas and for a future move, and Anthony Edwards is bought into that, I think that's a big win too. So whatever they do, like this comment says, make Ant happy. You don't want Anthony Edwards walking in next year and thinking Minnesota is not trying hard enough to build a team around me. Communicate with your star, which I know and I'm sure they do. But also make sure this move is, one, protecting Anthony Edwards' feelings toward the team. That matters. I don't think you make a decision based around a person's feelings. Usually emotion-based decisions fail. But you do want to make a move that he's comfortable with to a minimum, while also assuring some sort of long-term flexibility and upgrading the roster. I hope Minnesota can contend next year, but more importantly, Minnesota, regardless, needs more guard play to make Anthony Edwards comfortable. If this is a transitional phase next season, make sure it is with more guards who can take pressure off of Ant, with Naz Reid spacing the floor. I just need Anthony Edwards to stop running for his life offensively. He felt that in the second round. That is why Anthony Edwards, with 8 minutes left in the game, shook his hands. Not only did he want to get out of the way, I do truly believe that was a message. Anthony Edwards didn't believe in that team at the end. I don't believe he did. I thought watching the post game, Anthony Edwards was asked, what does this team need to do? And he was like, no comment. But reading between the lines on his body language, I don't believe, and I am not reporting, I am not speaking for him. I'm just saying, in my opinion, I don't think he believed in this current roster at the end. Maybe it's because of just injuries. Maybe he's bummed out that Dante was gone. Maybe he does believe in the team fully healthy. I don't know. But in that moment, he didn't believe in that team. So Minnesota, I think, needs to think about that as Anthony Edwards gets into his year 7. I think Minnesota has earned the right to play this out with Anthony Edwards. I think if Anthony Edwards had a bad year next year and demanded a trade, that would be super short-sighted. I'm not putting that into the universe. I don't think that's going to happen at all. But if that happened, that'd be a bigger reflection on Ant than Minnesota, because Minnesota has done a good job building a consistent winner around Anthony Edwards. They deserve the time to figure this next iteration out. But you still want to make proactive moves if you're Minnesota. And I think Minnesota, because they've been good for a long time, has earned the right to try to make the next right move. I'm sure Ant's pissed. Not pissed. I'm sure he's super happy for Cat. But I'm sure in the back of his mind, he's thinking, if Karl Anthony Towns was on the Timberwolves, we'd probably win the championship like the Knicks did. It's Ant's boy, right? That's the type of confirmation bias anybody would have with their boy. So I think Anthony Edwards, I think he feels that. And I think Minnesota should feel that urgency. So that's what makes this offseason especially interesting. You know, like a previous comment said from DW DWIT 3570. I agree. I think this is a very important offseason because this feels like a transitional phase for Ant, right? We've had the early part of Anthony Edwards' career in which it was, you had the veterans, you had the Cats, the D'Los, the Rudys, the Randalls, and then you had the young kids, Ant, Jaden, Nas. We're entering year 7 with Ant now. He's made 5 playoff runs. He's made it past the second round or first round for 3 straight years in multiple conference finals. He is not a baby anymore. So that is why he deserves, Minnesota to make the right move in this next wave. We are officially approaching the next era with Anthony Edwards in Minnesota. So with a lot of power comes with a lot of responsibility. So I am so curious to see what happens there. People see Randall in the playoffs and completely discredit him, not realizing he was our number 2 option and was a major player in getting us to the playoffs in year struggles. Yeah, I think that's a fair take. I think, in my opinion, I think Randall in Minnesota has run its course, but I don't think he's an awful basketball player. And anybody that tells you Randall's an awful basketball player is lying. Are there questions about Randall's personality with the way things ended in New York? The way, multiple teams before Minnesota and New York were more than comfortable letting him go? Yeah. With how things ended with Minnesota this year? Yeah, those are fair questions. Julius Randle's still a damn good basketball player. And Julius Randle is somebody that other teams should have some sort of interest in. I'm not saying that, I mean, if you want me to do the Wolf of Wall Street and convince people that he's worth 4 first-round picks, I'll try in my power to do that. But I don't think Julius Randle is by any means a negative asset. So I still think it's time to move Randle. I do, but it's not because he's bad. So I do think it's good to clarify that point. So yeah, John K also said he expects major shift in the starting lineup this year. And I think he's saying without saying it, Julius Randle's probably the guy. So there's all of that. Hey, Forrest Phillips, man. How are you doing, my guy? This is Julian Phillips' cousin, man. Dude, man, that was an interesting ride at the end of the year, right, man? Yeah, man. I wish your cousin, man. I hope he takes a big leap next year, man. He's got great tools, and I'm excited to see, hopefully he's in summer league. That'd be really cool to watch. Watch how he develops, man. Appreciate you for, sticking with this channel ever since the Ayo Dosunmu and Julian Phillips trade. That was really cool, man. So thank you for hopping on the show, man. I just want a point guard that will push the pace on the team. We were better playing team basketball when Ant was out because Ayo and Bones were just nonstop pushing the pace, and ball movement was way better. I agree, bro. And I think my theory on that has always been it's Anthony Edwards plus Julius Randle plus Rudy Gobert on the court. I think that combination of the three is just going to create either sticky offense, or if they play fast, it'll be inefficient. It's just not natural for all three of those guys all together to be fast decision makers. It's just not. So they do need more pace. That's why I think, trading a Randle and then getting Nas in the starting lineup and then getting another guard who's dynamic. I think the difference in the speed and the pace in that type of scenario is massive. I really do. So I think that's going to be a big part of why I think making a move in the front court makes a lot of sense. If we trade for a guard like Ja or White, do you see us also trading up for Phylon, or do we draft a power forward to be the backup for Nas starting? I truly believe, man, that this is my theory. This is a theory. This is a hypothesis. This is not reporting. I just want to say that. But I do believe that if a guy like Phylon's working out with Minnesota, it means that there's a very possible trade up in place. And I don't see how Minnesota trades up without dealing a player on the team, because they don't have a lot of capital in the draft that would be smart to trade at this point in time. A 2033 first and a 2028 swap. Those are valuable assets if you want to trade for a star in the future. And those are also just assets that if you don't have them, your flexibility is gone. So I think it's a player-based trade to trade up, which is why I think the trading up, including Randle, makes sense, or Gobert. I think Phylon is a good candidate. I think he's super talented. I've said this. He reminds me a lot of Andrew Nembhard and Dennis Schroeder with sprinkles of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I think he's that type of player. He was unreal in college, and he's going to get like criticism for being thin. He is a thin guy. He is about 180 pounds though, so he's not like Rob Dillingham. And also, he is 6'4" in shoes, so he's just a bigger guy with more length, 6'6" wingspan. So something to look at, I think, for sure. I think they're going to go after a guard, whoever it is. I keep mentioning, I think Derrick, I think Emmanuel quickly is that type of name that nobody could be talking about right now. And then like something happens and you're like, whoa, didn't think of that, just because I think he's a great fit. I think he's a really great fit in Minnesota. So yeah, man, I'm fascinated. It's going to be really fascinating. Okay, next question. Then honestly, what do they do tomorrow? I think they make a trade. I think they do. I think they're trading up. That's just my prediction. I'm not saying it's happening. I don't know what the odds are. That's my prediction. And I think if you trade up, I think it's probably in a deal that includes Randle or Gobert. So I kind of think Minnesota is a part of a big trade tomorrow, and it might be a domino effect. Maybe the Giannis trade gets done and then Minnesota makes a move. Or like I said in the beginning of the show, maybe this whole time it is Minnesota that is way more in the Giannis conversation than some people think. You never know with Tim Connolly, man. But I do think they're trading up. Or I think they're trading, period, point blank, for a player.
The irony of having Connolly, who had made a career off of his drafting prowess, and pairing him with Finch, who doesn't play young guards, is brutal. Young players is brutal. Yeah, man, I think the Dillingham pick might have been a whiff regardless. I like Terrence Shannon. I think they did a good job developing Nikhil Alexander-Walker. I think they have something in Beringer, and I think we're going to see that next year. I think Leonard Miller is going to have a career somewhere else. I'm still not fully out on the team can't develop players. I mean, Chris Finch developed Ant, Jaden, and Nas, right? So I haven't agreed with his decision making. I do think his leash is pretty short toward young players and probably too long toward veterans, notably Mike Conley. But I don't think he's a player that can't develop young players. I think there's a middle ground there. I think with time, and this is why I am so pro shifting into this next era for Anthony Edwards and kind of like elevating Jaden and Nas, because a part of that would be seeing what you have in young players too. And I think Minnesota has never gotten the training wheels off of this core yet because they've consistently filled this team with veterans and high salary front court players. So I still think we need to see what young players have. And the question I think is more so it's less than can Minnesota draft players who can play. I personally think it's will Minnesota give these young players who have a shot to play? That's my personal question, but you also might be right. They might just be terrible at drafting, or Chris Finch might be terrible at developing. I think we have to see. I just lean toward Minnesota has never given a leash toward young players yet. And if they blow up the front court or they trade Randall or something, maybe that's a path toward that direction. Or if they make a trade for a high salary player, they have to play little contracts. So maybe that's an excuse to lean into young players. So I think all of those are all of my thoughts regarding that question. But I think it's a very fair narrative that I've had questions with throughout the year as well. This comment, maybe there's a chance Rocco is ready to play and be our Brook Lopez type of player, tall rim protector and can space with the three. Yeah, I thought a year ago he was really far away, just physically. I thought his center of gravity was really high. And I think that his shooting is something. I think his size is amazing. I think his height's amazing. And I will see. I mean, I do think Tim Connolly's serious about finding a long-term small center or long-term starting center, which is why they drafted 2 last year. But yeah, I think Rocco's shown good signs. I think he had good signs in the G League. He made shots this year from 3. He blocked shots. I think he's gotten a lot stronger looking at him. There's a lot. I think at this stage with Rocco, he has done everything that you could hope for. And I think the summer league is going to be a great milestone, a great checking point to see where he's at. Question, what do you see us do with the draft pick? My prediction is I think they're trading up. I really do. I think they're trading up. That's my prediction. If they stick a pick at 28, I think there's some guys like Sergio de la Rea, who's a Spanish guard. Not the best fit if you're thinking about somebody who's pushing the pace, but he's a big guard who can really shoot. So I think playing with a guy like that off of Ant makes a lot of sense. Julian Phillips looked good when he got a chance to play. Yeah, man, he did. Dude's an athlete. And he was showing really good, like, I thought, intuition as a cutter as well. There's definitely something there with Julian Phillips. There's something there. So I think that is something to also think about. I hope he plays Summer League this year. I'd really love to see if he can kill it in Summer League. A lot of people talk about trying to not lose Ant's peaks window, but would moving up in the draft and playing a rookie be something that can push us all away? I think if the deal is like if you're trading Rudy Gobert for pick 14 and you're sticking and picking at 14, the answer is probably yes. I think if you're making a trade that includes trading up for a young player, I think that's a little different. I think if Minnesota can get more high-level first-round picks on the roster, you do it, but it has to be in creative trades where you're still getting veterans in the trade. So I don't think trading up for LeBaron Philon would push Anthony Edwards away unless it is we're trading Rudy Gobert for LeBaron Philon. I think that's where it would be a stretch. But if you're just getting an asset while making a trade and that asset tends to be or happens to be another higher first-round pick, I think that's cherry on top, frankly. Maybe the rationale is trading up or maybe, so this comment, maybe the rationale for trading up is that TC wants to do a gap year, which gives time for new rookies to develop. Yeah. I wouldn't be mad at that. I wouldn't be mad at if they get another young talent and they elevate Nas and Jaden. To me, it's less about, is it a gap year, and more about, are you doing things that get the most out of Ant, Jaden, and Nas? I think if they don't make a big star trade and try to swing for a contention, which, by the way, I'm not fully for. I think there's a lot of risk to trading for Giannis, more than positives, even for a guy who's a top 3 player in the world. But I do think that it's all about, for me, can you help Jaden and Nas? And I think that's about getting more guard play. And if that includes a gap year, great. If that includes being good next year, even better. But yeah, I don't think Minnesota's in a position to do a desperate move and trade up for, pick 16 for Rudy Gobert, either, or also trade everything for Giannis. I think it's somewhere in the middle. My question is, Phylon going to fall? It depends on what you mean by fall, in my opinion. I mean, never say never. This is a loaded guard draft, guys. This is a loaded guard draft, like historically good. Like, I can name a handful of guards in this draft that would have gone top 10 in 2024 in the Rob Dillingham draft, okay? Darren Peterson, Mikael Brown Jr., Keaton Wagler, right? I think LeBaron Phylon would go top 10. I think Christian Anderson would go top 10. I think Kingston Flemings would go top 10 that year. I just named 6 guys on the top of my head who I think were better as prospects than Rob Dillingham was in 2024. It's that type of draft. LeBaron Phylon's a higher level talent than Rob Dillingham. And Christian Anderson is basically Rob Dillingham with a 6'7" wingspan, right? So, and plus Christian Anderson has way more off-ball willingness than I think, Rob Dillingham had. And so he could fall to like pick 23, I think, worst case scenario. But I would be shocked if he fell to 28. And even if Phylon fell to 28, why would you as an agent give in on the idea that my prospect's falling? I'm going to work out with Dallas. I'm going to work out with Cleveland. I'm going to work out with Minnesota at pick 28, 29, and 30 to assure he stays in the first round. That would feel desperate. I don't think Phylon is nearly in bad enough of a spot where he needs to protect his first round stock. I think he's very firmly a top 20 pick. Maybe worst case scenario, he falls to Atlanta at 23. But I think this agent is working out with Minnesota, having Phylon work out in Minnesota because they think Minnesota has a shot to trade up. That's the only logic I have. Yeah, and 17 is also an interesting pick idea because OKC has 2 first-round picks. Maybe they don't want to draft 2 first-round picks when they made the Aaron Wiggins trade to Atlanta yesterday, so that opened up a roster spot and saved $62 million in cap space. But also, are they going to fill up those last 2 roster spots with first-round picks? I don't know. It still makes a lot of sense for OKC to either trade up or trade out to keep a roster spot open. So maybe pick 17 is part of that, which is OKC's pick. If we keep pick 28, what do you think of Zuby Ejiofor? I'll be frank with you guys. I haven't watched a ton of him, but I know he's been like really killing the draft process. I know he's worked out with 17 different teams, and he's a super high motor athletic 4. So I know there's a lot of teams that have interest in him, and I think there's a lot of first round buzz when I hear about his name. He's from St. John's, 6'8", 0.75 feet tall. He averaged 2 blocks, great length, kind of like Rasheer Fleming last year, who I really liked. He had a 7'5" wingspan as a wing. This dude has a 7'2", so he's not quite as lengthy, but another really high motor player. And the little I've watched of him, he feels like a very similar archetype to a Mo Johnson out of Michigan. So a super high motor athletic 4 with a lot of physicality, the Isaiah Stewart, the Mo Johnson, that type of frame archetype. So talented dude from all I've heard. Sounds like he's very likely going to go first round. Very late draft riser. Spent 4 years in college. Had a really productive offensive year as a senior. I don't know what Minnesota does at 28. I think if Minnesota drafted another big and there's no guard help, and that's all they do in the draft, and there's no trade for a guard, I would see why Minnesota fans would be frustrated, because I do think they need more, wing and guard help. So I don't think he's the best fit in Minnesota, but he is definitely a riser who, from what it seems like, is going to go in the first round tomorrow night. Next one, going to be heavily disappointed we move up for one of these 19 to 20-year-old slightly undersized guards. I don't see any of these guys holding up against OKC or San Antonio. Yeah, I think if you're drafting a rookie guard to be the solution against the Spurs and the Thunder, these guys aren't Dylan Harper. These guys are thin dudes. Like all these guys in the mid-first round pick, right? Christian Anderson, Ibuka Corey. Ibuka Corey is actually stockier, but Anderson, Sturts, LeBaron Philon, all those guys, they're thin. They're thin. So I don't think they're built to withstand those teams year one, but I do think they're talented. And those are guys that are in a good development plan if you draft them. So I'm not against it if it's a part of the bigger trade. I wouldn't trade Rudy Gobert for only draft picks and then stick and pick. But if Minnesota makes a trade and a higher first round pick is a part of the deal, I'll make a comp for you guys. Like when Minnesota traded Jimmy Butler and the Bulls got, Lauri Markkanen and Zach LaVine pick 16. If Minnesota's on the other side of that and they jump up a lot of spots in part of a bigger trade, I think that's where you justify, drafting a LeBaron Philon or somebody like that. And yeah, like Philon can put on weight, like this comment says. I mean, and he's got something that I don't think Dillingham had. Like Dillingham was very springy. He was very rushed. I thought he struggled with physicality. Additionally, I think he struggled with angles, which is why 2 years in, he never developed a floater as a guy who's the same height as me. That was a Dillingham issue. The contrast with Philon, he's bigger, but he's also, when you watch his tape, he is brilliant with angles. He knows how to really maneuver his body. I think he absorbs contact well, and he's got some like versatility with the shot making, whether he does a, drop step and he, does that like stop gather step that like Ant and Luka Garza did, or he does a floater, or he bounces off of you for a fadeaway. He's got a lot of moves. He's got a bag, I'm trying so hard to say bag without a Minnesota accent because I get roasted every time I do it. But yeah, I think Philon's actually a very good prospect. I think he's a lottery pick. I like him more than the average person, I think. But the weight questions are fair. The defensive concerns are fair. But also, in fairness with his defense, like he was the offense in Alabama. I don't think he was as bad of a defender his freshman year as his sophomore year. And Philon was like the guy in college his sophomore year. He went from like a 10-point per game scorer to a 23 in a year. So his usage, his responsibility went up significantly, So, yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see, right? I mean, I think Philon's got ability. I really do. And if he's a part of a trade, like if Ja's in the trade, or maybe it's a Charlotte trade and you get Diabate and Josh Green and LeBaron Philon and something else, like I can see that being justified. Yeah, worry about a Rudy deal without a backup for defense. We saw what happens on the floor without Rudy. Yeah, man, that's the question about trading Rudy. What do you do to accommodate for what he has defensively? Because to Rudy Gobert's credit, he's probably the third greatest Timberwolf I've ever seen in my life. And he was the defense. They couldn't defend without Rudy on the court. So how do you resolve that? That's on the coach, and that's on whoever they bring on the team, right? You can't become a sudden bottom 10 defense on this roster. I think whatever they do, they maintain a defensive identity. That's what they should look to do, which is why, if I had to guess, I think there's a better than a 50-50 chance that Rudy stays. I think it's probably like 75-25 if I had to guess. But yeah, I think that's kind of the question in relation to Rudy Gobert. What are you without him defensively? And then the other question, if you keep him, what is the offense like in the second, third round of the playoffs? And that's where you start saying we need to significantly upgrade the playmaking on this roster. And that's going to be the next step if you keep Rudy. Would you want Josh Giddey for Randall in 28th plus Dante? That sounds like a lot for Josh Giddey. It saves him money, but it's a lot for Josh Giddey. I can hear him being worth Rudy or Julius Randle in 28. Maybe. I don't think he's that great of an asset, though. I think he's a good asset, but I don't think he's worth that much more than Randall, frankly. I know he's 23, but that's a lot for Josh Giddey, in my opinion. That's why I don't worry about prospects to wait. He could be like TSJ, go to the weight room every day and say TSJ got banned. Yeah, man, he can get stronger. He can get stronger. I'm actually not that worried about Phylon's body, if I'm completely honest. And yeah, man, I love TSJ. I think the fact that he has that type of work ethic, and that's a question if you trade up for a Phylon, how would that affect a Shannon Jr., right? Somebody who Chris Finch has talked about needing the ball in his hands. I think it's a very valid concern. We should draft Joshua Jefferson and have him play point guard. It would create mismatches. Yeah, man. I mean, Joshua Jefferson's interesting, man. Like you can kind of use him as like a, I don't know, Kyle Anderson, like a connective playmaker. He's a very good passer from Iowa State. I think Joshua Jefferson is an idea if they stay at 28. I do. Yeah, people should realize that defense is what kept us from getting far, and our offense struggles have been what limited us. Yes. And that's why, like, the Rudy Gobert, I'm pro exploring Rudy Gobert trades, because if you're Minnesota, you need to make a ballsy decision, whatever you do. There is risk in every decision the Minnesota Timberwolves make. Whether they keep Rudy Gobert, there's risk in his offense being a ceiling cap to this team. If you trade Rudy Gobert, there's risk about the defense. If you trade for John Morant, there's risk there. If you trade for Giannis, there's risk there. If you trade for anything, there's risk there. The question is, can you make the right calculated risk? And if they are confident that they can shore up the defense without Rudy Gobert and get better on the perimeter and add more long-term flexibility, I think that's a good route. We need to sign Jet Howard, 6'8" player. Yeah, I mean, it's weird the Jet Howard thing didn't work out in Orlando. Like, I'm concerned about that because they so desperately needed a shooter, and they took him in the lottery, and they still didn't play him. I mean, he's a good gamble, I think, in a two-way type contract, but I wouldn't like sign him and get like expectation, you know? And now to like finish up the show, I want to like mention a couple more names that could be in the mix for Minnesota. I mean, Trey Murphy was mentioned by New Orleans, Minnesota going after Trey Murphy. And Trey Murphy, as I said earlier in the show, his value is at all-time high from the Pelicans. I would deal him. And he does provide off-the-catch shooting and athleticism and rim attacking, and he does have just enough creation to keep a defense honest, especially when a defense breaks, which is what you want with Anthony Edwards as your best player. So he's a fit there. But can Minnesota win a Trey Murphy bidding war with a rebuilding team like New Orleans? That takes a lot. And also, are you going to go all in for Trey Murphy when the guard questions remain high still? That's where I have questions. But he does provide very similar benefits as a Michael Porter Jr., as somebody mentioned in the comments. So, yeah, I think it's interesting. Kyrie Irving, I've said this, I think he's the best fit of anybody. I think he's the most portable. I think he has the most star upside in this individual year outside of Giannis Antetokounmpo. He probably wouldn't cost enough to like break your roster apart. Also, championship pedigree, championship experience. But if Kyrie Irving is not going to get traded, he's not going to get traded. In Minnesota, takes two to tango. So it sounds like John Kay said, like Dallas, I think it was John Kay who said that. But there's been multiple people who have said that Kyrie Irving is not likely getting traded and Dallas is not looking to trade him. And yeah, those are all the names that I really have for today's episode. I've mentioned Emmanuel Quickly as an option I like. Joel Moran mentioned Jaylen Brown. Maybe Minnesota jumps in on the Giannis trade, gets Jaylen Brown. I mean, those are all ideas. And I think Minnesota is going to do something that's going to be fairly big, but we'll see. It's going to be fascinating. And I'm going to go through the last couple comments before we conclude this show. Hour and 28 in, guys. You guys are incredible. And like I said, I am going to go live when Minnesota makes a move and when Minnesota makes a draft pick. So there could be one more live in the next 2 days, but there could also be two more if Minnesota makes a trade. And if they make a trade in the draft, it might just be a big draft show. It might turn into that. So a lot of possibilities, y'all. Rudy is also our offensive problem, and why Ant gets doubled so often. It's because he's so bad offensively. That plus the bad spacing, plus the bad playmaking, all that added up just creates a team that gets really muddy, really quick, really, just sloppy offense. That's the question. There's definitely not enough playmaking and floor spacing in the front court starting currently for this team to be an offensive team. that makes a championship run. So, yeah, man, can you get enough guard play and spacing to win a title with Rudy? That's the $1 million question. And that's why Tim Connelly gets the big bucks, right, y'all? And this will be my last one. My last question I'll answer before we end the show. Thank you guys so much. Again, thank you. Did Io get any thoughts? Why waste all those seconds for a couple months? I truly don't believe Tim Connelly made that trade for Io DeSumo with the expectation they're going to lose him. I think Io DeSumo gained leverage with how Minnesota whiffed on Rob Dillingham, with how Minnesota lost Dante DiVincenzo. It gave Io a lot of leverage, but also considering they let Nikhil walk, I don't think they're going to let Io DeSumo walk. I really don't. So we'll see what happens. I think Io is going to stay in Minnesota. By all indications, Minnesota is really aggressive to keep Io DeSumo in the organization. So I guess it's a wait and see on what happens there. But if I had to guess, man, I would be shocked if Io DeSumo leaves. I'd be shocked. I'd be stunned. I would give it like a 10% chance. I think Minnesota is going to keep him. And even Io DeSumo, like in his press conference entering Minnesota, discussed he wants to stay here long term. And he did say he's excited to explore being a free agent. I think people took that report the wrong way. I think Io DeSumo was more so saying, like, I'm just curious what it's like to be a free agent. I think it was more that than I am ready to leave Minnesota. So, and he also was very appreciative of the organization at the end of the year. I think they're going to get Io back. I really do. Joshua Jefferson could be very similar to Jalen Johnson. Cade or Giddey gives us that big guard, and he plays defense. Man, if they draft Joshua Jefferson, man, it'll be a fascinating pick. I think if they do draft front court, I think getting a versatile, connected decision maker, it's more important to me to get Anthony Edwards around smart, connected passers than it is a traditional point guard in the modern NBA. So Joshua Jefferson in that mold makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, I'm down for it. 4-year college player, ton of IQ, ton of size, versatility. Definitely an option. I think he goes first round for sure. What will happen to Bones? Okay, I'll go last 2 questions. Thank you all so much. I appreciate the support and the kindness in the comments as well. You guys are incredible, really are. And what will happen to Bones Highland? I don't know. I don't know. I know he wants to come back. He's been very adamant about that. Can Minnesota get him back for cheap? What is Bones Highland worth? What is his market? Because I think he did kind of save his NBA career this year. So he might have multiple suitors. And I think if Minnesota wants him, they'll have him. But if they design the roster, if they draft Phylon and they add a guard and they keep Io, it might just not be enough for Bones to stay. But I think if Minnesota only makes one or so guard move, I can see him staying, being the 3rd or 4th guard. But anything beyond that, I can see him leaving. So yeah, guys, it's going to be a fascinating draft, guys. It's going to be the storylines, man. Literally any second a trade could happen. Like literally any second a trade could go down, and man, I'm excited. And last comment, what do you think of Dylan Mitchell from St. John's? I know he's super athletic. Like I said, St. John's is not a team I watched a lot this year. I'll be completely frank with you. But I know he's super athletic. St. John's has a lot of those super athletic wings. You know, some who can't shoot. He's definitely somebody who's not a shooter, from what I know. But super athletic, maybe 2nd-round option. I'm not sure. You know, they have Rasheer Fleming. They have the other big, who's a projected 1st-round pick, who's flying up boards. Zuby, I think his name is. And then they have Tunde Esafu coming in next year, who I think, if he has a good sophomore year, could be in the running for number 1. He has a very similar profile to Anthony Edwards. So those are a lot of names to think about, man. Like, this is going to be a fascinating draft. I think it's a little more shallow than people expected because of the NIL and all the returns this year. But exciting draft. So many storylines. I think once this Giannis Antetokounmpo happens, this trade happens, whether it's in 5 minutes, 5 seconds, or in 26 hours, we'll be here. We'll be here on Wilder Wolves, y'all. Thank you all so much for watching this episode. It was fun catching up, addressing the Timberwolves rumors before the draft. I think we got through everything that is especially notable, and it's been a great episode. Thank you all so much for engaging in the group chat. It's really a fun time of the year for the off season, and we're just going to live it up. And thank you for subscribing, my guy. Thank you all so much who have subscribed to Wilder Wolves recently. We're almost at 4.5K subscribers now. And Wilder Wolves, guys, came out literally a year ago now. It came out on June 17th, 2025. And the growth of this platform has been so unbelievably appreciated. This is a Timberwolves fan community. And the fact that you guys have bought into building this as a community for Timberwolves fans is an absolute honor. And it's so appreciated. Thank you guys so much for helping Wilder Wolves grow to where it is right now. And we're only getting started. So much more happening in the future. And yeah, thank you guys so much for hopping on. It is always so fun to talk Timberwolves basketball. So thank you guys for hopping on. We'll be live for the draft for sure tomorrow night. If not, we might be live sooner if the Timberwolves engage in the trades. So this is just getting started. This is the spot you guys want to be if you guys want immediate Timberwolves news reactions. This is where to be. This is the spot. So thank you all so much for listening. This is Wilder Wolves Hall of Fame Mode Fandom.